Hello again, Year 5, and today I'm going to continue to talk about the narrative we should be writing called The Ascent. In the last video, I discussed how you should plan your narrative. Today, what I would like to do is I would like to go over each section that I expect you to write and give you some ideas and suggestions of the different types of spag you can include. So here we've got the opening. You can see at the top I've included the information from my plan. So I'm just going to read out what I have written. "Wow, I feel like I'm on top of the world," exclaimed Luke as he looked down at the forest below. He couldn't believe how different the view had looked only hours earlier. At precisely 5:30 that morning, Luke and his climbing instructor Peter had driven Luke's 2012 white Toyota Yaris to the car park at the foot of Mount Graham in Arizona. As Luke and his friend had driven along the tree-lined, quiet road, doubt had plagued him. He had never climbed a mountain before, and now that the colossal grey rock was towering over him, he shivered with fear. Covertly, Luke looked at Peter for a reaction, but to his dismay, Peter looked happy and excited. Of course he's excited, Luke thought to himself. He has no fear. Peter, who was an experienced mountaineer, had convinced Luke that climbing Mount Graham would be the perfect way for him to improve his climbing skills. At the time, Luke had agreed wholeheartedly. However, standing at the foot of the imposing peak made Luke rethink his commitment. Peter looked at his friend. He could see the fear and worry in his face. "Don't worry, once you start climbing, you will be fine," he said, as he picked the equipment and walked towards the base. Luke was glad for the reassurance, but sadly it wasn't helping. Anxious, Luke grabbed his climbing gear and silently followed Peter. So now what we're going to do is we're going to check that I've included the things I wanted to from the plan. So you can hear I definitely have the first sentence. I've opened with some speech, and you can see I've got my inverted commas. Inside my speech I also end with a punctuation. Here I've got an exclamation mark, and then I have the second set of inverted commas, and I've included the rest of the sentence. I've also included some fronted adverbials that give an idea of time. I've included a subordinating clause, which you can see here. And I've included some different things about what he can see. Now, in my plan, I said that he said the forest looked tiny, but as I've written, I've changed that slightly, and I've decided to describe what the mountain looked like in front of Luke. So it gives you an idea of what they can see. I've also, if you look, included different fronted adverbials such as covertly, and I've also included some different super sentences. So here I have a motion word comma, which I know you're all really used to using. So I would like you to include some of them in your work. The other thing to note is you can see at this section I've used italics. The reason I've used italics is this was what Luke thought. So you could try to include that in your work as well. So the next part of the work is the build-up, which I'm just going to read to you. Now they were halfway between the base and the peak. Luke's confidence was improving. The air was crisp and fresh, and the noise of the forest floor and car park was unintelligible. All he could hear was the screech of a nearby eagle as it glided through the air. Between the ground and the clouds, Luke finally understood the joy of climbing that Peter had described to him. Everything seemed quite majestic from this height. Beautiful pine trees encased the road, creating a cascade of green leaves that stretched for miles. The only break came when it reached the town in the distance. From that height, the town looked like a child's toy, when in reality it was actually a very large, busy place. Luke felt that he could reach out and pick up the houses as if they were pieces of Lego. "Look, look!" shouted Peter. Surprised, Luke reluctantly departed his daydream and focused on the voice pulling him back into reality. Within a second, Luke was both present and alert, looking up at his instructor. "Sorry, did I wake you?" Peter joked. "You drifted off into your own world for a minute. Remember, you need to stay focused, otherwise you might fall." Luke sighed. He knew Peter was right, but he wasn't impressed that he had interrupted his thoughts. Annoyed and irritated, tired and sore, Luke reached out his hand to grab the corner of the rock above him. Just as his fingertips touched the rock, he lost his footing. A blink of an eye, Luke fell backwards. So you can see here, again, I understand that Luke's following Peter, so Peter is leading the climb. You can see that, again, I've got lots of fronted adverbials to start my work here within a second, but also I've included more super sentences. So here, I have included the two sets of adjectives. I also have included extra pieces of dialogue. I've included brackets. Sorry about that, the colour isn't perfect for you to see. So yes, you can see why I've included brackets. You can also see where I know it's in there, but I can't remember where it is. I have included the paired conjunctions as well. So please have a read over that yourself and remember the different adjectives that I'm looking for in different types of punctuation. You can see with my vocabulary, I have up-leveled words. I've described what he can hear and what he can see. And you can see how I've up-leveled it. So rather than saying that beautiful pine trees lined the road, or there were lots of beautiful pine trees, I've used the word encased. Okay, rather than saying there were lots of green leaves, I've used a cascade to give the reader a little bit more help to imagine the scene. And the reason this line at the bottom I have in yellow is this is the start of my problem. In a blink of an eye, Luke fell backwards. So you can see in the end of the build-up, the last line is leading into the next paragraph of the problem. You can see I've included a fronted adverbial, and it is actually quite a short sentence just to build up a little bit of suspense for the reader. In my next section, we have the problem or the dilemma. He couldn't feel anything. In the distance, he saw Peter turn and reach out his hand, but it was too late. Luke hurtled through the air, images of his life flashing before his eyes, his mind awash with questions. What's happening? Is it real? Am I dead? Thud. Luke hit the ground. Scared, he lay there with his eyes closed. He could hear Peter shouting but was unable to understand what he was saying. Paralysed with shock, he listened to his rapidly beating heart. Why aren't I dead? He thought. Little did he know his safety rope had pulled him towards the mountain and he had landed on a smooth, flat edge. And again, his thoughts, I can just put in italics to show it's his thoughts. You can see that I've included many questions. And I also have emotion word, comma from the super sentences, just to add a little bit more information. I also have some different fronted adverbials in there to make it more interesting. Now, the important thing to note is that the last sentence again is leading into the resolution and how they're going to fix the problem. So we know that Luke hasn't fallen too far because he was saved by his safety rope. And it's in the resolution. We need to know how they fix the problem. Luke, are you okay? Can you hear me? What happened? Peter shouted as he scrambled down the mountain. I'm coming, he cried. As soon as Peter reached the ledge, he knelt beside Luke. He gently slapped his face. Luke, can you hear me? Open your eyes, urged Peter breathlessly. Luke blinked. You're okay, Peter stated. What happened? Luke asked. Peter explained that he had lost his grip and fell, but luckily the safety rope had swung him towards the mountain and he had landed on the ledge. Once he had finished explaining, he asked Luke to try and move his arms and legs. Luke did as he was instructed. Next, Peter asked him if he could try and sit up. Again, Luke complied. Finally, Peter checked Luke's head. There were no bumps, bruises or cuts. It looks like your helmet and safety equipment saved you from any serious injury, mused Peter. You only fell about 10 feet, he declared. I only fell 10 feet, screamed Luke. I thought I was going to die. Luke stared at Peter in disbelief. He could not understand why he wasn't taking it more seriously. Peter took a deep breath and explained that he understood it must have been terrifying for him, but it could have been a lot worse. People that usually fall while climbing end up seriously injured or dead. Once Luke was calm, Peter asked him if he wanted to start his descent. Luke said he wanted to complete the climb. Peter helped Luke to his feet and they continued the climb. So again, you can see how the problem's been resolved. I've included that Luke only fell 10 feet and it was his safety equipment that saved him, which is a plausible explanation for what happened. Here, I've tried to include more speech to move the story along. I've tried to include short sentences. So here we go. Luke blinked. 2 words. Short, snappy sentences help give a little bit more information, but as well keep the reader's interest from the long sentences. It breaks it up a little bit for them. I've got time connectives that you can see here in front of adverbials for time. Use next. I've used finally. And again, remember to change lines every time a new person starts to speak. The other thing I've done is up-leveled my words related to the topic. So I've got words here like descent. So descent means to climb down. And then what happens is most people would end the story here, but actually this isn't the end of the story. We need something that sums up everything. So here is the end. That afternoon, Peter and Luke reached the summit of Mount Graham. As they stood surveying the land below, Luke felt an overwhelming sense of pride, which made his eyes fill with tears. He had done it. When Luke looked to the horizon, all he could see was the army of white horses trotting towards the sun. The cold air nipped Luke's cheeks, the snow crunched under his boots, and the fresh air filled his lungs. He had worked so hard to achieve this, especially after his accident earlier that day. He had earned this view. Fulfilled, tired, relieved, Luke took a deep breath. Now I really am on top of the world. So again, with the ending, you can see I've got different frontage adverbials, such as that afternoon, that tell you what time this is happening to help keep the chronologically the story going. You can see here I've included different types of punctuation. I've included an exclamation mark, I've got commas, I've got my capital letters. I've even got my dashes as well. Rather than using brackets all the time, you can include your dashes to add a little bit more information. And here I've described what he can feel and what he can see. And in this sentence, I've said, when Luke looked to the horizon, all he could see was an army of white horses trotting towards the sun. Now, an army of white horses isn't actually a lot of horses. I've used a metaphor to describe what the clouds look like from their height. And again, my last sentence, fulfilled, tired, relieved. You've got your 3 ED sentence there, and I've ended with a piece of dialogue, which is the same way I started my story. And the dialogue I've included is, now I really am on top of the world. And the reason I've ended with that is now the story has made a full loop. It's went back to where it started, where he thought when he was halfway up the mountain he'd reached the best view he could, and now he's at the top. He now understands that actually this is the better view. So I hope this helps you to write your own story. Please feel free to keep going through the video, looking back at the different sections. What I suggest you do is listen to my input for the opening, stop the video, go and write your opening, come back listening to the build-up, and then stop the video and then write your own, and do it in sections like that. The expectation with work like this is that you include your opening, build-up, dilemma, resolution and ending, which means that minimum I should see 5 paragraphs in your work, 1 for each section. I expect to see some dialogue, which includes your inverted commas and the correct punctuation inside your inverted commas. Frontage adverbials with commas at the end. A relative clause, so that is where I want to see, if we go back to the beginning, you can see I have included one here, Peter, who is an experienced mountaineer, and you can see how I've included the commas either side, from the beginning of the pronoun to the end of the relative clause. Okay, and it is important that you include a relative clause. Another example of a relative clause There is 2 more examples. What I suggest you do is play the video again, see if you can spot them. And when you email the work, if you can tell me the extra relative clauses that are in there, that would be really, really good to see. And obviously I've included my super sentences. Thank you.